So I have started recording. You can give your attendance. So we are discussing the properties of chelating agents that make them suitable for their being chosen for chelation therapy, right? And we have discussed what is chelating agent, uh, how the chelate effect arises, or what is the reason behind the chelate effect, and then we are listing what are the factors that a chelating agent must satisfy in order to be chosen as a probable agent for chelation therapy. And we have said first of all that the chelating agent must be the chelating agent that will be that will be used for chelation therapy must have high specificity, meaning that it will specifically bind with the targeted metal ion, but it will not react with other biological metal ion. And other thing is that the chelating agent must have very high binding constant with the targeted metal ion, higher than the biological ligand which is binding the toxic metal ion. And regarding when we are discussing specificity, then we said that we have to apply hard-soft acid-base principle. And in this connection, I was giving a brief presentation about the hard-soft acid-base principle. And I have told you that hard acids are those substances which whose electron cloud is are held very firmly so that it cannot be polarized easily, it can be deformed easily. And so since normally cations are acids, so in terms of cations must have high positive charge and small size. And if the charge decreases or size increases, the softness increases. And I have given you the example for instance between arsenic 3 and arsenic 5. Arsenic 3 will be softer, and arsenic 5 having higher positive charge and smaller size, it will be harder. Between chromium 3 and chromium 6, chromium 3 will be relatively soft. Chromium 6 will be much more harder because of the higher positive charge and smaller size. Between copper 2 and copper 1, again copper 1 is much softer and copper 2 is relatively harder, and in fact it is the borderline case. Now when we go to the base, that is the anion, obviously an anion has got more negative charge than its nuclear positive charge. As a result of this, for anion, we cannot, unlike what is the difference between cation and anion, the small size is there, right? So both for acid and base, it should be a small size. But whereas for the acid we have demanded, it should have high positive charge, because then the electron cloud will be held very firmly. For anion, if it is a high negative charge, there will be electron repulsion and there will be deformation of the electron cloud. So for anion, the demand is opposite. The negative charge should be as small as possible. So -1, -2, not more than that. So hard acids has got small size and high charge, high positive charge. Hard bases, which are normally anions, they should have small size and less negative charge. These are the hard attributes of the hard acid and hard base. Now, the opposite is true for soft acid and soft base. For soft acid, it will have large size and relatively small positive charge, right? So large size and relatively small. That means the cations which are down the group where the size increases, they will be relatively softer. In a given group, the cations which are present in the upper part of the group, right, the beginning of the group, they will be relatively harder. And as we go down the group, normally as the size increases, so they become softer. Right, so the cations having large size and small positive charge, they will behave as soft acid, right? soft acid. And similarly anions which are opposite, so large size, and here it was less negative charge, here it is high negative charge, so they will be the softer anions. For instance, if I take the halogen series fluoride, chloride, bromide, iodide, fluoride has got a small positive charge, fluoride has got a small negative charge, and it has got a much tighter size. So obviously, fluoride is fluoride is a hard base. On the other hand, iodide, the same, it has got -1 charge, but because its size is very large, so obviously iodide will be a softer base. Similarly, if we
Sir,
go to, yes.
so soft acid means weak acid.
No, no, this is not weak base. This is in terms of polarizability. So it doesn't mean that all soft acids are weak acids and all soft bases are weak bases. No, not that. Right? This is simply in terms of their electronic property. So soft acid means they are they are easy to polarize. For instance, suppose arsenic 3, it is a softer acid, or say cuprous ion or mercuric ion. They are, so we are talking about Lewis acid base theory, right? So soft acid means those acids whose electron cloud is easy to polarize. So they are softer
So
acids.
what does soft means? As
I have told you in the beginning, soft means softer electronic cloud. So that means easy to polarize. Hard means harder electronic cloud, means those cations or anions which are hard to polarize, which are hard to deform, they are called hard acid or hard base. The opposite, the cations or anions which are difficult, which are easy to polarize, whose electron cloud can be easily deformed. So you think them as they have a soft electronic cloud. So since they have a soft electronic cloud, meaning they are easily deformable electronic cloud, they will be called softer acid or softer base depending on whether they are cation or anion. Is it okay?
okay, sir. Thank you.
So sorry. So whereas fluoride ion is a harder base, or oxide ion is a harder base, because they are relatively small size and relatively smaller charge also. Opposite to that, iodide ion is a softer base, right? Sulfide ion, selenide ion, these are softer base. So fluoride, oxide, hard, uh, iodide, sulfide, selenide, they are soft. Similarly, whereas your sodium, potassium are hard, we can say rubidium, cesium are soft. Whereas beryllium, magnesium, they will be hard because they have small size. But say barium, strontium, they will be relatively harder. Similarly, if you go to the transition metal ion, as so you have, for instance, the second first transition metal ions, they are relatively harder, right? Say titanium, zirconia, say titanium, say ferric, vanadium, etc., cupric. Cupric is in fact in the borderline. Whereas the second and third transition metal ions, like say ruthenium, osmium, platinum, palladium, because they have relatively larger size, and because 5D or 4D orbitals are not so strongly held as that of the 3D orbitals. So what happens? They are easy to deform. So fast transition metals are in general they are harder metal ions. Their cations are harder. second, second and third transition, corresponding second and third transition metal ions are relatively softer. For instance, zinc we can say is a hard metal ion, right? On the other hand, cadmium and mercury ion, cadmium 2 plus or mercury 2 plus ion, they relatively softer. So uh, easy to polarize means softer, hard to polarize or hard to deform of the hard deformation of the electronic cloud means they are hard acids. Now the rule is that I am not going to the details of the rule, but you can easily imagine those acids or bases who are hard to polarize. So because polarize, if there is no polarization, there will be no covalent bond, because covalent bond formation means polarization of the electron cloud and overlap with each other. So hard acid and hard base, they will interact through mainly ionic bonding, ionic interaction. Whereas soft acid and soft base, they will interact mainly through covalent bonding. So hard acid hard base combination is ionic bonding. Soft acid soft base combination is generally covalent bonding. Now the rule for hard soft acid base theory is that when given a preference, suppose we have a hard acid and you in a reaction vessel you have a soft base and a hard base. Then rule is hard prefers hard and soft prefers soft. That means hard acid prefers hard base, soft acid prefers soft base. So I have written a reaction here. Suppose in a reaction vessel we have taken a hard acid, a soft acid, a hard base and a soft base. And if you react, you will find predominantly we shall get this combination, that is hard acid has combined with the hard base and soft acid has combined with the soft base, and the other combination it will be relatively minor amount of product. So rule is hard prefers hard, soft prefers soft. This is the rule. But remember, someone was asking question just now. This hardness and softness has nothing to do as such with the acidity or basicity, because sometimes if the inherent acidity or basicity is quite strong, even the so-called hard soft combination becomes quite stable. For example, I have given an example here. Hydrogen ion is one of the hardest species, right? Because it is nothing but a proton. So hydrogen ion is a hard acid. Hydride ion is a soft base, because hydride ion there is only one proton, two electrons, so the electron cloud is very much deformable. So as such, because it is a hard acid and because it is a soft base, if you follow the above criteria blindly, you may not expect that they will react with each other. But the inherent acidity of hydrogen ion and inherent basicity of the hydride ion is such that even when hydrogen ion is a hard acid and hydride ion is a soft base, then but still hydrogen ion when mixed with hydride ion, they react explosively to form hydrogen gas. So it is not that as if hard acid and soft base do not react with each other. They react with each other, they form stable complexes. But when given a preference, when a hard acid is given a preference between a hard base and a soft base, it will probably predominantly react with the hard base. Similarly, when soft acid reacts with a soft base, when soft acid reacts with a hard base and a soft acid reacts with a soft base and a hard base, it will predominantly react with the soft base. So this is called hard soft acid base principle. Hard prefers hard, soft prefers soft. Now, why this principle is coming into play in this chelation therapy? Because among the toxic metal ions, there may be some toxic metal ions which can be categorized as hard acids, some toxic metal ions which may be categorized as soft acids. For instance, if you are developing toxicity due to say mercury ion or due to say lead ion, Pb2 plus, then lead, mercury, etc., because they are relatively heavy metals, they will be categorized as the soft acids. So the chelating agent which you shall prepare will be loaded with donor atoms which are soft donor atoms, soft bases, right? So you require soft bases to chelate those metal ions like say lead, mercury, etc. Like, so you prefer sulfur ligands or selenium containing ligands rather than oxygen containing ligand, right? So on the other hand, if you want to remove toxicity due to say excess iron in your body, because ferric is a hard acid or beryllium is a hard acid. So if you want to remove toxicity due to say ferric iron or beryllium poisoning, etc., or boron poisoning, because they are hard acids, so you will prefer chelating agents whose donor atoms are hard bases. That means they will contain oxygen nitrogen donating ligand. So that is the case. So when we want to remove a a toxic metal ion which is relatively heavier metal ion, which is relatively softer metal ions, then we shall prepare chelating agent containing donor atom as soft bases. On the other hand, if we are trying to control toxicity due to some poisoning due to certain hard acids, excess of hard acids like ferric, beryllium, zinc, etc., boron, etc., then we shall consider chelating agents whose donor sites are loaded with nitrogen and oxygen donor atom because they are hard bases. On the other hand, if you have a say arsenic poisoning, then probably since arsenic is more or less a borderline, arsenic 3 is more or less a borderline case, so probably we can use a soft or a mix of hard soft donor ligand. So that's how you design your ligands to get the best possible solution to your chelation therapy. So we say that it must show high specificity towards targeted metal ion, and in order to achieve this high specificity, normally we apply Hartsoft acid base principle. So depending on the nature of the metal ion, we choose the chelating agent in such a way that they provide donor centers which are either hard or soft or a combination of hard or soft. The third criteria is that the chelating agent must have uh, low toxicity. Obviously, if the chelating agent itself produces much toxicity, then it will not be used for treatment. So chelating agent must have low toxicity. This toxicity is measured in terms of a value. It is called LD50 value. LD means lethal dose. So lethal dose 50. It means suppose you take a culture of cells and you feed it with the chelating agent, and LD50 value is that value or that concentration of the chelating agent where 50% of the cells die and 50% of the cells survive. So 50% lethal dose, that means 50% cell will die. That is called LD50 value. Obviously, if a chelating agent is very toxic, its LD50 value will be low. On the other hand, if toxicity is low, it will be tolerated at higher doses, so LD50 value will be high. So we want our chelating agent should have low toxicity. That means its LD50 value must be high. And finally, we want that our chelating agent must be sufficiently lipophilic, because we know cell membrane has got lipophilic characteristic, right? So you have lipid membranes and the drug has to penetrate through that lipid membrane. So in order to make them solubilize in the lipid membrane, penetrate the cell membrane, we demand that chelating agent must have sufficient lipophilicity, and this lipophilicity arises when the chelating agent has got sufficient covalency. So if the chelating agent is sufficiently covalent, it does not carry any charge particle, then it will have sufficiently lipophilic, so that it can penetrate the cell membrane and go inside the cell. But we also demand after metal complex formation, the resultant metal complex with the chelating agent must have sufficient water solubility so that it can be excreted from the body. So there are very strict criteria. First of all, the binding affinity of the chelating agent must be quite high towards the targeted metal ion. Second, we must design the chelating agent in such a way that it has got high degree of specificity, though this is very difficult to achieve. Normally, the ideal thing is that your chelating agent will attack only the toxic metal ion, but it will not affect any other essential metal ions. But this is very ideal case. But we try to go as close as possible to this ideal situation by applying the Hartsoft acid base principle. The chelating agent must have low toxicity. It itself should not prove to be highly toxic to the body. And finally, the chelating agent must have sufficient lipophilicity so that it can enter the cell membrane easily and go inside the cell. And then once it has attacked the desired metal ion and it has complexed the desired metal ion, you also demand that metal complex of the chelating agent must have sufficient aqueous solubility so that it can be excreted from the body. So we shall go one by one to some very important chelating agent. The first chelation therapy was applied during the First World War, where the Germans were attacking with a kind of poison which is called Lewisite. Lewisite, as you can say, it is a organo-arsenic compound. There is a carbon arsenic bond, right? So it is a organometallic compound. It is an organic arsenic compound. Sorry. So this is the chelating agent. This is the chemical warfare agent which the Germans were using. And what this chemical warfare agent does, that in our body, in our body there are, I have told you, there are many sulfur containing ligands. Say, so we have amino acids, say sulfur containing amino acids like say cysteine or methionine, right? So we may have A's or SC3. Now, since arsenic is a soft metal ion, I have told you here arsenic oxygen state is +3. Since arsenic is a soft metal ion, so what this Lewisite used to do, that it used to attack very important proteins in our body, very important enzymes in our body, and it used to block the sulfur containing amino acids. Sorry, it used to block the sulfur containing amino acids. So arsenic sits here. So these two Cls are replaced by two arsenic, and then other things remain. So our important enzymes and proteins are blocked by when the arsenic attaches itself to the sulfur containing amino acids, and toxicity develops. So this was how the Lewisite was attacking the human body. It is blocking important proteins or enzymes in our body by picking up the sulfur sites in our enzymes and proteins and attaching itself to the sulfur ligand like cysteine or methionine. Now the anti-Lewisite agent called BT, because British scientists developed this reagent. It is called British anti-Lewisite. The chemical name is 2,3-dimercaptopropanol. This compound, you can say 1,2,3. So it is a propane. So 2,3-dimercaptopropane 1-all. This is the correct name, right? So it is a one position there is a OH group, that is alcoholic group, and 2 and 3 position we have the thiol groups, and you can treat your victim, Lewisite victim, with this chelation therapy. And what it will do, that because again this contains the chelating thiol, so this chelating thiol will react with this arsenic compound, and it will bind the arsenic in this way, and it will excrete arsenic from the body. So this was the first application of chelation therapy, we can say, in modern civilization. And it was in terms of a warfare agent. So to neutralize the effect of Lewisite, British anti-Lewisite was applied. Now, but this British anti-Lewisite or 2,3-dimercaptopropanol has got many disadvantages. First of all, it is not water soluble, so it has to be suspended in vegetable oil, and then it has to be applied intramuscularly. So it is not water soluble. It has got very bad smell, and obviously its administration was very difficult, because it has to be administered by suspending in a vegetable oil and then through intravenous injection or transfusion. And it has got many side effects, particularly very severe allergic reaction and its other kind of side effects. So people try to find out uh, what alternative we may have. And in terms of alternative, people discovered two very nearly similar but somewhat more efficient reagent. Here you see again 1, 2, 3, a propane derivative. Now again in the 2 and 3 position we have thiol group. But what is the difference? In the previous one, here we have a OH group, Instead, here we have so in this compound which is called 2,3-dimercaptopropane 1 sulfonic acid, or commercial name is imnithiol. Here we have a SO3H group. And during administration, what happens? You actually dissolve in sodium bicarbonate. So ultimately, you convert it to the sodium salt, and as a result of this sodium salt is highly water soluble. So this compound is water soluble. So instead of intravenous injection or intramuscular injection, you can administer it through orally, or if in higher dose it is required, it can be administered intravenous by intravenous transfusion also. And very near to it, again, here we have a 2,3-dimercaptosuccinic acid. So here again we have carboxylic acid groups, and you can, with the reaction of sodium bicarbonate, you can convert it to the sodium salt, right? So these OH groups may be replaced by sodium ion. Right, so CO2 minus, so Na plus, and again increasing the water solubility. So both of them you can dissolve in water. You can, for smaller doses, you can use treatment through mouth, taking through the mouth, or if you require higher doses, you can administer through intravenous transfusion. But the toxicity and the other side effects of these two drugs are much lower than that of the British anti-Leucite, and that's why in modern therapy for removal of arsenic, instead of the old 2,3-dimercaptopropanol, now this imnithiol or 2,3-dimercaptosuccinic acid, it is DMSA, right? 2,3-dimercaptosuccinic acid, it is called DMSA, right? And it is called DPSA, right? So dimercapto, di, rather DM. DPA, dimercaptopropanol SA, right? Dimercaptopropane sulfonic acid. So DPSA or DMSA, they are used commercially. Now, because they contain this previous ligand, British anti-Leucite, as well as these two ligands, contain sulfur-containing donor group. So these reagents were also used for removal of lead toxicity, mercury toxicity, particularly lead and mercury toxicity, because lead and mercury are also soft metal ions, and since we have a soft donors here, thiol group, so either 2,3-dimercaptopropanol or imnithiol or DMSA, they can also be used for the removal of toxicity due to lead or mercury. But there is some problem with the, again, this compound 2,3-dimercaptopropanol. It was found that when you use this for removal of mercury toxicity or lead toxicity, it was found initially okay in the cells which are affected by this poison, mercury or lead, the toxicity is decreasing, but later the patients were dying. Now, on analysis, it was found that though from the cells which were affected by lead and mercury, they are being removed of lead and mercury by this reagent, but this corresponding mercury and lead compound of this ligand were being accumulated in the brain. Why? Because for this ligand, mercury compound, lead compound has got such a covalent character that it can breach the blood-brain barrier, and it can ultimately relocate itself in the brain, and there is the brain toxicity, nerve toxicity, right? And ultimately the patient used to die. So ultimately, this compound was, just as it was abundant for arsenic poisoning, it was also abundant for mercury poisoning and lead poisoning also. But on the other hand, it was found that because of this ionic character, relatively more ionic character, because when you are administering it, it is in terms of SO3 minus or CO2 minus salts. So because it is more ionic, these two compounds, so their lead and mercury compounds cannot breach the blood-brain barrier, so they cannot translocate to your brain, and so the neurotoxicity is is almost very low or absent in the case of these two ligands. So for treatment of late toxicity and for the treatment of mercury toxicity, whereas the previous ligand 2,3-dimercaptopropanol was almost useless because ultimately the brain neurotoxicity was developing. Here, these two ligands are very efficient not only for the treatment of arsenic poisoning, but they are also very effective for the treatment of lead poisoning and mercury poisoning. Next, copper poisoning. I have told you the day before. So for copper, excess copper leads to a disease called Wilson's disease, where excess copper is deposited in your liver, brain, retina, etc., and ultimately it will prove fatal, right? So, and this is typical genetic disease where because of genetic reason, the ceruloplasmin protein is not being synthesized in your body, so your body do not have proper homeostasis for copper ion, and so copper toxicity develops. So though the previous ligands which I have discussed, the unithiol and this DPSA and DMSA can also be used for copper poisoning, but from trial and error it has been found that the best solution for copper poisoning is this ligand. It is called D-penicillamine because it has been derived from the penicillin. D-penicillamine. You can see here why it is D, because this carbon atom is actually asymmetry, so it can have D and L conformation, right? So you have a carboxylic acid group, so you have a NH2 group, so it is an amino acid, you can say, right? Alpha amino acid, and then you have a thiol group. So D-penicillamine can react with copper, and in fact when it reacts either with cupric copper or cuprous copper, it forms a very complicated complex. 12 ligands react with 14 copper ions to form a very complicated complex. So you have a 14 copper ions, among which 8 copper ions are in the plus 1 oxidation state, 6 copper ions are in the plus 2 oxidation state, and there is a chloride ligand also. So very complex structure. I will not go into the details. So it is one of the most efficient ligand one of the most efficient ligand for removal of copper toxicity, and it very effectively removes copper by forming a very strong complex with the copper. But it was found D-penicillamine has got relatively lower capacity to penetrate the cell membrane, right? So in order to achieve more penetration of the cell membrane, that means so that the higher concentration of the reagent goes inside the cell, right? Inside the cell, what people did that in this NH position, this amide or this amine position, it was acetylated. So these two compounds are identical, except the fact that in the N position, one of the hydrogen has been replaced by the acetyl group. So this is called N-acetyl D-penicillamine. So this is D-penicillamine. Here the one of the hydrogen has been replaced by the acetyl group. So it is called N-acetyl D-penicillamine. This N-acetyl D-penicillamine is found to be less toxic than this penicillamine, because whereas D-penicillamine, lot of it is wasted outside the cell because it cannot penetrate to the cell membrane. N-acetyl D-penicillamine, because of its higher covalency, it can penetrate to the cell membrane, so effectively more easily or at lower concentration it can pick up the copper ions from your cells, and ultimately when it goes inside the cell, in the cell environment, this acetyl group is actually hydrolyzed and you get D-penicillamine generated. So you are, as if this is, sometimes it is called a prodrug, right? You are using a drug and then you are modifying it so that it becomes more soluble. It goes to a targeted cell easily, and once inside the targeted cell, the prodrug will react with the body fluid and the drug the D-penicillamine will be generated. So N-acetyl-penicillamine goes through the cell membrane easily, and then inside the cell, it is hydrolyzed, it regenerates the D-penicillamine, it forms copper complex, and then this copper complex is excreted from the body. So this is so far the copper toxicity is concerned. And here you find, I have told you, copper 2 is a borderline and copper 1 is mildly soft metal ion. And note here what we are using, unlike the previous case of lead, mercury and arsenic poisoning, where you are using a dithiol type kind of ligands, here we are using a combination of carboxylic acid and thiol. So we are using the hard soft acid base principle for arsenic, mercury, lead, which are more soft metal ions. we are using donuts which are purely soft. But for metal ion like copper, which is in the borderline region, we are using a chelating agent which contains combination of a hard ligand like oxygen and or a hard donor atom like oxygen and a soft donor atom like thiol. So we have a mixed hard soft donor ligand. Next, iron poisoning. Now, iron poisoning, again, I have told you that excess iron leads to liver damage and hemochromatosis. Now, apart from normal diseases which sometimes leads to iron excess in our body, there are many people who requires periodic blood transfusion. For instance, people who are তিনটে কুড়ি So people who have got thalassemia or people who have got sickle cell anemia, they have to undergo blood transfusion sometimes more than once a week, right? So what happens, you know that blood inside your body after few days it decomposes, right? And ultimately the excess, because you are continuously transfusing blood, so excess iron is accumulates in your body. And for people who have to take repeated blood transfusion, the excess iron that is deposited in their body has to be removed. And I have told you ferric iron is a hard metal ion, so in order to remove it, we require hard donor atoms, so oxygen nitrogen kind of donor atom. Now, one of the most very important ligand which is commercially used for removal of iron poisoning in those patients of thalassemia or sickle cell anemia is called desferal. The structure is given, both the structures are identical. This is a more cyclic kind of structure is written, it is in a more open form. So what are the donor atoms? The donor atom here, these are the donor atoms. This C double bond NH, this is called oxamic acid, right? This is called hydroxamic acid. So there is one hydroxamic acid moiety is here, one hydroxamic acid moiety is here, and one hydroxamic acid moiety is here, right? Here. So we have the oxamic acid moiety 1, so sorry, 1, 2, and 3. Three oxamic acid moiety hydroxamic C double bond NH, C double bond NH, C double bond NOH. So three hydroxamic acid moieties are there, and you can see that these hydroxamic acid moieties react with the ferric iron and it coordinates ferric in a hexadentate fashion, very strong coordination. And ultimately it chelates the ferric ion and it takes out the ferric ion. So the hydroxamic acid moiety this is more clearly visible here. So here we have the hydroxamic acid moiety, here we have the hydroxamic acid moiety, and here we have the hydroxamic acid moiety. So three hydroxamic acid moieties reacts with the ferric iron, it chelates, form a very strong complex, and it excretes the iron. And till now desferal is almost in 95% cases, desferal is the ligand which is used for iron poisoning. But again, desferal has got certain disadvantage. First disadvantage is because it is a complicated ligand, so it is very costly, right? And again, probably it has got certain allergic reactions, and other complications, right? So people try to find out whether there can be a simpler alternative to this desferal. And in search of this alternative, scientists came up with this very simple molecule. You can see basically it is a pyridine moiety. Now the nitrogen atom of pyridine is methylated and it is oxidized in the 4 position. The para position to the pyridine is actually converted to a ketone, and here we have another OH group attached. So this is called diferriprone, right? And this diferriprone coordinates through this oxygen ligand, and this proton goes away, so this become O minus. So the ferric 3. So 3 such ligands coordinate with the one ferric ion. So unlike this very complicated ligand, this is a much simpler ligand, and so it is much more cost effective, and it has found its toxicity is also much lower than desferal. So gradually desferal is being challenged with this particular chelating ligand diferriprone. It is attracting the market, right? So it is a new chelating agent which is coming up for the treatment of iron poisoning, whereby the very simple a derivative of the pyridine compound, right, where 4 position of the pyridine moiety is got a oxo group, and this 3 position has got a hydroxy group, and it can coordinate iron in a bidentate fashion, and 3 such ligands with coordinated ferric iron, and it will chelate ferric iron very effectively. So this is also a very important chelating agent for the removal of iron. Next, we shall come to the late poisoning, or sometimes even excess calcium poisoning. So you will actually, unfortunately, we are not doing practical. So in practical class, if we have our practical, then in one of the experiment we have is estimation of hardness in water using EDTA, ethylene diamine tetraacetic acid. So this is ethylene diamine tetraacetic acid. You can see that CH2 is ethylene, and then there are 2 nitrogen groups here. So this part, if there is no other thing, this can be called as ethylene diamine. If there is NH2 here and NH2 here, you can call it ethylene diamine. Now what has been done here, that the 2 hydrogens of these nitrogen atoms and 2 hydrogen of this nitrogen atoms has been replaced by acetic acid group. You see here the COH CH2. This is the acetic acid group. So hydrogen atoms of ethylene diamine is replaced by acetic acid group. So it is called EDTA, ethylene diamine tetraacetic acid. So it is a tetraacetic acid group. The 4 hydrogens of the amines are replaced by the acetic acid group. Now, as such, EDTA itself is not soluble. So what we have done, what people used to do, that for any reaction, instead of EDTA, we take Na2H2 EDTA. So 2 acetic acid groups remain protonated, and 2 acetic acid groups are actually replaced by sodium ion. Now, as you can see from this figure, this is a hexadentate ligand. It can coordinate a metal ion through the 4 acetic acid groups. So one acetic acid, 2 acetic acid, 3 acetic acid, 4 acetic acid. So 4 acetic acid carboxylate groups are attached to the metal, and the 2 amine groups are also attached to the metal. So it is a hexadentate ligand. It forms very strong complex, and in fact EDTA is such a strong complex reagent, it can probably react with any metal ion depending on the pH. So if you adjust the proper pH, even it can react with calcium, magnesium, these metal ions which are normally very hard to get complex, right? So EDTA is a very versatile complexing and chelating agent. So when you have excess poisoning due to lead, apart from the thiol ligands which we have discussed, we can use, or people can use, this kind of EDTA ligands also, right? So EDTA is also one of the ligands, or Na2H2 EDTA is also one of the ligands which can be used for lead poisoning. Now the problem is that if you treat your patient with only Na2H2 EDTA, Then EDTA, as I am telling you, it reacts also with magnesium and calcium. It can form complex with magnesium and calcium also at biological pH. So if you treat your patient with only Na2H2 EDTA, there is a chance that along with lead, it will pick up the beneficial calcium and magnesium also, ions also from your body. So in order to prevent that, people use various form of EDTA. So here we have shown that Na2Ca EDTA. So instead of Na2H2 EDTA, you can use Na2Ca EDTA, so that two protons are replaced by calcium ion. Sometimes people also use say Ca Zn EDTA, because EDTA also reacts strongly with the zinc ion in your body, and zinc is again very important metal ion in your body, essential metal ion. So to prevent depletion of calcium or zinc in your body, instead of bare Na2H2 EDTA, very often medical persons used Na2CADTA or CAZNADTA, this kind of thing, so that because you are administering calcium and zinc from the outside, so there is very little chance of depletion of calcium and zinc ion from your body. So EDTA is a very potent ligand for treatment of lead toxicity. It can also be used for treatment of calcium toxicity or zinc toxicity. Now, a slightly different version of EDTA. Here in the EDTA we have diethylene triamine, right? So you have a two nitrogen atoms connected by ethylene group. Here we can see that here there are three nitrogen atoms, and each of the two adjacent nitrogen atoms are connected by a ethylene group. So it is called diethylene triamine because there are two ethylene groups. So if we leave aside first of all these acetic acid groups, if we consider this ligand only, say NH2, CH2, 2, NH, CH2, NH2, NH2, it will be called diethylene diamine, diethylene triamine, right? Diethylene triamine. Now, next what is done here, that so there are two hydrogens here, two hydrogens here, and one hydrogen here. So each of the hydrogen atoms on nitrogen are replaced by acetic acid group. So what you get? Diethylene triamine pentaacetic acid, DTPA, diethylene triamine pentaacetic acid. So just as EDTA is a very good complex agent, DTPA, diethylene triamine pentaacetic acid, is even better complex agent. So it can be also used for lead poisoning, and again this some of the carboxylic acid groups may be loaded with calcium or zinc, for instance, right? So you can use it also for lead poisoning, but better this ligand is normally used, DTPA is normally used for the treatment of lanthanide poisoning, lanthanide and actinide poisoning, particularly plutonium poisoning. So for plutonium poisoning, that means those people who work in the plutonium reactors, etc. Plutonium is a very toxic metal ion, and even traces of plutonium may prove to be fatal. So for people affected with plutonium toxicity, this DTPA, diethylene triamine pentaacetic acid, was used. But again, it was found that DTPA alone is not very good reagent for treatment of plutonium toxicity, particularly if there is the plutonium load of the patient is quite high, because because of these acetic acid groups, it has got low lipophilicity, it cannot penetrate the cell membrane effectively. So now look at the second ligand, which is a derivative of the uh, DTPA. What has been done, that basic structure is unaffected. Now, in the two carboxylic acid part here, this carboxylic and this carboxylic acid, they have been converted to the amide. You know carboxylic acid from your organic chemistry knowledge, carboxylic acids can be easily converted to the amide. First of all, it has to be chlorinated COCl, POCl3 or SOCl2 reacted with this, so it will be COCl, and then COCl can be converted to the amide using the amine. So it has been converted to the amide, and to the amide we have added a Deccan chain. So there are 10 carbon atom chain, and at the end of the 10 carbon atom you have the carboxylic acid group. So then the carboxylic acid group returns, but with the addition of 10 extra carbon atoms. So because of this extra 10 carbon atoms here and extra 10 carbon atom here, so the compound become very much covalent and it can go easily penetrate the cell membrane. So for plutonium toxicity, particularly for those patients with whom we have the higher load of plutonium, for plutonium toxicity, we have a combination chemotherapy. We have DTP and PUCL. PUCL goes, this is called plutonium chelating. PUCL means plutonium chelating agent. So I'll end very short, the 1 minute. So PUCL will go inside the cell, penetrate the cell membrane, will go inside the cell. It will pick up the plutonium inside the cell. And once it returns outside the cell in the blood or in the body fluid, then this reagent has got better affinity for the plutonium, so it will take up the plutonium and it will excrete to the liver or kidney, right? So it is a combination chemotherapy, DTP and PUCL, both are used together. PUCL acts inside the cell, whereas DTP acts outside the cell, and in combination both of them can remove plutonium toxicity very effectively. So I think, yes, we have completed the chelation therapy. So now we are left with 2 or 3 points. One is the application of radionuclide as imaging agent, and then we have the MRI imaging, and then metal complexes as certain metal complexes in medicine. So these 3 parts. So thank you for the attention. So I end my class here. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Okay,
Thank
thank you.
you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.